All right, you all are ready to be introduced to arrays of structures. So I'm going to open up, this was what was in the last video where we had a student information, where we put it in a structure, which was awesome. And then in our program, we created my student, and then we created another student. Okay, but sometimes you want to create a whole array of students. And so I'm going to modify what we have here. That's my modification music. Okay, and I need to modify all this code that I wrote because the syntax is different when you have an array of students, or of any structure for that matter. Okay, so we want to create an array of students. Let me make this huge. Okay, I can call my array stu array, and let's say I want to keep up with 10 students. So what this is going to do in memory is create an array. Bloop. Oh man, that's not right. Bloop. That's right. Of 10 students. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm sorry that's ugly, but hopefully you get the idea. 6, 7, 8, 9. There we go. That's a 0. It looks like a 6. Those are our index values. So now we have an array, and those arrays are students, which means that in each one of these array elements we have a student ID, we have a name, we have a major, we have a GPA, we have an age, and each one of these elements has all that stuff. Okay, so you got to imagine that all that is in memory now. All that data. Okay. So now that's how you create an array. And that can be used instead of parallel arrays. We can create 10 students very easily by just creating a new data type, this student data type, and then creating an array of those students. And so if we wanted to access an individual student's data, so let's say we want to access this third student with index 2, we would just say stu array sub, we have to say which index, this is a 2, then we have to access specific members at a time. And so I would put dot operator student ID is equal to whatever. It doesn't matter. Just making up data at this point. So that will put a 1077 into the student ID member of this third student in this 10 element array of students. So notice the syntax. What is the array? It's a student array. So that's why I have to indicate the index attached to the name of the array. Now I want to mention it's also possible to have an array inside of your student structure. And for example, this wouldn't make sense, but if I had a student ID array of 100 elements, wow, that does not look like 100. Let's make it 7 elements. You would then have to indicate an index after student ID. Okay, but this is an array of students, which is why we put the index connected to the name of the array. Okay. So that's a little note about syntax there. What else? So we still use that dot operator. And I do have a program, an example program. I got to pull it up here. It's called array struct _1. And you all have access to this. Just so you all can see what I'm doing here. Here it is, array struct. So here's my structure called pay info, and here's where I create an array of pay info elements. So I called it workers. That's just the name of it. It can be named anything you want. This is a 3-element pay info array. So in memory, let me pull up, there we go. In memory, on line 20, I would have 3 elements. This is my workers array. And in each of these elements, I have an hours member and I have a pay rate member. Bloop, 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 bloop. Hours, pay rate, hours, pay rate. This is what it looks like in memory, or similar to how I want you to think of it anyway. Okay, and workers, of course, holds the memory address of this first element. It's our name of our array. We also have a variable called index, which on line 27 is initialized as 0. Index is less than num workers. Remember, num workers is 3. Num workers. Okay, so 0 is less than 3. So it'll print out hours worked by employee number 1. I'm sorry, it'll say, actually I can't read the rest of that. It'll say index plus 1, so it'll say 1. Hours worked by employee 1. And then it'll have a colon, and then it'll read in to workers sub 0, because index is currently 0, point hours. So let's say that the first employee that we're looking at worked 40 hours. Let's change the color up to green. That would go right here in the index 0 hours member of the workers structure array. Then hourly pay rate for employee number 1, and we would read in the pay rate. Let's say they get paid $8.75. That would go right there. And then it'll print out, here is the gross pay for each employee. Actually, I'm sorry, I skipped over the rest of the for loop. We would then increment index to 1. 1 is still less than 3, and then we would print out hours worked by employee number 2 and read that in. Let's say they entered in 25. And then we'd read in the pay rate on line 37. So let's say they make $20 an hour. And let's say employee 3 works 45 hours a week. And they get paid $25.60. And that is where all that happens in this for loop. Then it'll say, here's the gross pay for each employee. And we have a for loop that will calculate the gross pay and put it in this temporary variable called gross, which the scope of this variable is only this for loop. So gross is equal to worker sub index dot hours. So index is set back to 0. So worker sub 0 dot hours times, I'm on line 47, times worker sub index dot pay rate. So this will multiply 40 times 8.75, and it will place that result inside of gross, which it will then print out. And it will do that for each one of these workers. All 3 workers will be printed out what their gross pay would be. So that's how you would work with arrays of structures. You could also pass an array to a function. Let's say you add some function where you're sending, this is a pay info structure. So you're sending that structure array, wow, I can't write right now, to the function. So let's say this is a void function and it does something, and we send it the array, which you can pass an array either in pointer notation, which would have a star there, or array notation. If it's pointer notation, you would put the star before the array name. If it's array notation, you would put the square brackets after the name of the array, like that. Okay, either way, you can pass a whole array of structures to a function, and it works like just any other array where it's passed by reference, which means any changes you make to that structure array in this function will be applied to the calling function. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I wanted to tell you about this. I think that's it. So that's arrays of structures.